Welcome to this new lesson of the course Self-Publishing with GenBookAI. Write and publish your book with AI. Up to this point, we have worked on how to generate a solid idea for your book and how to build an engaging setting. Now let's tackle a crucial aspect of writing, plot construction. The plot is the backbone of your book. Without a well-designed structure, the story risks becoming confusing, lacking intention, or not engaging. But a well-constructed plot is not just a sequence of events. It is an emotional journey that guides the reader through a coherent and compelling narrative. In this lesson, you will learn how to structure an effective plot for your book, the main narrative models and their use in writing, the importance of conflict, turning points and climax, practical tools for organizing and developing the plot. At the end of the lesson, you will be able to create a well-structured story that holds the reader's attention from beginning to end. Why is plot structure so important? Every successful story follows a well-defined structure, even if it seems spontaneous. The human brain is wired to recognize narrative patterns and predict logical developments, which is why stories with a clear structure are more engaging. A study from the University of California showed that readers remember stories better if they follow a well-organized sequence of events with a clear beginning, middle, and end. Example: let's take a story that doesn't follow a clear structure. Anna was on a trip. Then she meets an old friend. Suddenly a fire breaks out, and then she goes to live in another city. There is no coherence. We don't know what is happening, and there is no common thread. Now let's look at a more structured version. Anna is forced to move to a new city to escape a painful past. Here she meets Marco, a childhood friend who makes her relive forgotten moments. But when a fire destroys her home, Anna must make a difficult choice: return to her old life or start over. This version creates a logical flow, narrative tension, and clear progression that keeps the reader engaged. The most effective narrative structures. 1. The 3-act structure. Act 1. Introduction, introducing the protagonist, the world, and the main conflict. Act 2. Conflict and development. The protagonist faces increasing obstacles and grows through the challenges. Act 3. Climax and resolution. The story reaches its climax and finds a satisfying conclusion. Example: The Lord of the Rings clearly follows this structure. Act 1. Frodo receives the ring and must undertake the journey. Act 2. The difficulties increase, the fellowship splits, and Frodo faces the weight of his mission. Act 3. The final climax with the destruction of the ring and the return to the Shire. Perfect for novels of any genre. 2. The hero's journey. This model, developed by Joseph Campbell, is widely used in fiction. Key stages: call to adventure. The protagonist receives a mission. Crossing the first threshold. The adventure begins. Trials and growth. The protagonist faces obstacles, enemies, and discovers his own strength. Climax and transformation. The greatest challenge leads to a definitive change. Return to normality. The protagonist has changed but returns to his world with new awareness. Example: Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Harry lives a normal life until he receives the letter to Hogwarts. He must face trials and discover the truth about his identity. The climax occurs when he faces Voldemort and realizes his greatest mission. Ideal for fantasy, adventure, and coming-of-age novels. Conflict and turning points. Conflict is the engine of the story. Without obstacles, the reader has nothing to root for. Internal conflict. Emotional or psychological struggle of the protagonist, e.g., overcoming a fear, making a difficult decision. External conflict. Adversaries, nature, society, or situations that create difficulties, e.g. a war, a conspiracy, an escape. Example: In Pride and Prejudice, the internal conflict is the prejudice between Elizabeth and Darcy, while the external conflict is the society that hinders them. Tools for planning the plot. 1. Mind maps. Use mind mapping to visualize the connections between events and characters. 2. Scrivener or GenBookAI software. Like Scrivener helps you organize scenes and chapters, while GenBookAI generates narrative ideas and suggests logical connections. 3. The card method. Write the main events of your story on physical or digital cards and try to rearrange them to improve the narrative sequence. These tools make the writing process more structured and less chaotic. Practical exercise. Write a short 5-sentence plot following the 3-act structure. Beginning. Introduce the protagonist and the problem. Development. Introduce the obstacles and difficulties. Conclusion. Show how the conflict is resolved. Read your plot and ask yourself, is it clear? Does it maintain high tension? Does it have a well-defined narrative arc? We've worked on how to structure the plot, develop engaging characters, and build a believable narrative world. Now it's time to tackle one of the most crucial parts of writing a novel: the climax and the conclusion. A book can have a brilliant idea and a solid plot, but if the ending isn't up to par, the reader will be disappointed. On the contrary, an exciting climax and a satisfying conclusion can transform a good story into an unforgettable experience. Today, you will learn: what is the climax, and why is it the most exciting part of the story? The different types of climax and how to build it effectively. How to write a memorable conclusion that is consistent with the plot. Tools and techniques to test the effectiveness of your ending. By the end of the lesson, you will be able to write a gripping climax and a conclusion that will leave an impression on your readers. The climax, the moment of maximum tension. The climax is the highest point of tension in the story, the moment when everything is at stake. This is where the reader must be completely involved and feel the weight of the protagonist's choices. A study by Stanford University has shown that the climax of a story activates the same areas of the brain involved in solving real problems, making the experience immersive and exciting for the reader. Example: think of the great movies or books you have loved. In The Lord of the Rings, the climax is the moment when Frodo arrives on Mount Doom. In Pride and Prejudice, the climax is when Darcy confesses his love to Elizabeth, but she rejects him. If the climax is weak or poorly constructed, the reader will lose interest right at the most important moment of the story. Voiceover. The different types of climax. There are different ways to build an effective climax depending on the type of story you are writing. 1. Action climax, based on a spectacular event or battle. Typical of thrillers, fantasy, science fiction, adventure. Example: the protagonist faces the villain in a decisive duel. 2. Emotional climax. The climax is internal, based on a revelation or personal growth. Typical of dramatic, romantic, psychological novels. Example: the protagonist finally understands his mistake and changes radically. 3. Surprise climax. The reader is led to believe one thing, but the climax completely reverses the situation. Typical of detective stories, psychological thrillers, horror. Example: the real killer is not who the reader thought, but someone unsuspected. Choosing the right type of climax is essential to maintain coherence in the story and ensure a strong emotional impact on the reader. Building an effective climax. 1. The climax must be the result of all previous events. It must not seem improvised, but must derive logically from what has happened before. 2. It must involve a strong conflict. The protagonist must be faced with the most difficult decision of his life. 3. Increase tension with rhythm. Use shorter and more direct sentences. Alternate moments of calm and moments of high tension to surprise the reader. Example of climax construction. Imagine a mystery in which the detective discovers the murderer but has no evidence. The climax comes when the culprit falls into his trap and confesses, closing the circle of the story. A well-constructed climax leaves no room for hesitation. The reader must feel that this is the decisive moment. Writing a perfect conclusion. After the climax comes the conclusion. This part is essential to leave a good impression on readers. 1. Types of conclusion: closed ending. All the knots are untied, the reader has clear answers. Example: in Harry Potter, the battle is over, Voldemort is defeated, and Harry rebuilds his life. Open ending. It leaves room for interpretations or possible sequels. Example: in Inception, the film ends with the doubt whether Cobb is still in a dream or not. Surprise ending. It overturns the reader's expectations. Example: in Fight Club, the protagonist discovers that he himself is Tyler Durden. Circular ending. The story ends by returning to the starting point with a new awareness. Example: in The Great Gatsby, Nick returns home with a completely different outlook on life. Choosing the right ending depends on the message you want to leave your readers with. Techniques for testing your book's ending. 1. Ask yourself, is my ending satisfying? Will the reader feel satisfied, or will they be left with too many questions? 2. Test multiple endings. Write 2-3 versions of the ending and choose the most powerful one. 3. Have beta readers read the ending. Their feedback will tell you if the climax and conclusion work. Testing the ending helps you avoid mistakes and improve the narrative impact of your story. Lesson summary. Today we learned the importance of the climax as a point of maximum narrative tension, the different types of climaxes and how to choose the right one for your story, how to write a memorable conclusion that leaves a lasting impact on readers, practical tools to test and improve the ending of your book. We've worked on how to build a solid plot, create engaging characters, and write a powerful climax. Now it's time to structure your book into chapters and maintain the right narrative rhythm. Dividing your book into chapters is not just an aesthetic issue, but a key element to making reading smooth and engaging. A book without a clear division can seem messy or difficult to follow. Likewise, a poorly calibrated rhythm can bore or confuse the reader. In this lesson, you will learn how to organize your book into well-balanced chapters, how to maintain a narrative rhythm that captures the reader from beginning to end, the best techniques for managing cliffhangers and moments of pause, practical tools for planning and testing the division into chapters. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to organize your book in a logical way and maintain an effective rhythm that keeps the reader glued to the page. The importance of chapter division. A well-structured book is like a well-written TV series. Each episode must leave the reader wanting more. A study conducted by the University of Oxford showed that readers tend to remember better and complete books with well-balanced chapters more quickly than those with sections that are too long or irregular. Example: imagine reading a thriller. If the chapters are too long and full of unnecessary descriptions, the tension drops. On the contrary, if they are too short and confusing, the reader will not have time to immerse themselves in the story. Finding the right balance is the key to maintaining the reader's attention. How to break a book into chapters. There is no fixed rule for the length of a chapter, but there are effective strategies for organizing the narrative. One chapter is based on key events. Each chapter introduces an important moment in the plot, a discovery, a challenge, a dramatic turning point. Example: in a mystery novel, a chapter might end with a shocking revelation. 2. Point of view. Chapters. If your book has multiple main characters, you can dedicate each chapter to one of them. Example: in Game of Thrones, each chapter is told from the point of view of a different character. 3. Rhythmic chapters, alternating shorter, more intense chapters with slower, more descriptive ones helps maintain the pace. Example: after an action-packed chapter, a more thoughtful chapter helps the reader process the events. Choosing the right strategy depends on the type of story you want to tell. Maintaining the narrative pace. Narrative pace is the speed at which the reader perceives the evolution of the story. Too fast a pace can make the story seem rushed and superficial. Too slow a pace can bore and make the reader lose interest. How to find the right balance. 1. The flow and tension method. Each chapter should alternate moments of tension and moments of respite. Example: a chapter in which the protagonist faces danger, followed by a chapter in which he reflects on what happened. 2. Cliffhangers and open questions. Concluding a chapter with a twist or an unanswered question pushes the reader to continue. Example: he opened the door and saw something he could never have imagined. 3. Variety in scene. Pacing fast action, dialogues, chases, sudden discoveries creates dynamism. Slower scenes, descriptions, introspection, world building give depth. Maintaining a balanced pace allows you to guide the reader without tiring him. Tools to organize chapters. There are several tools to plan chapters and ensure a good narrative pace. 1. Scrivener or Notion organize chapters and scenes in a visual interface. 2. GenBookAI. It helps you structure chapters and suggest turning points. 3. The index cards method. Write the main events on index cards and rearrange their sequence to find the best rhythm. Using these tools makes it easier to review and manage the narrative structure. Mistakes to avoid in chaptering. 1. Chapters that are too long or too short. Avoid endless chapters or chapters that are fragmented for no reason. 2. Lack of logic in the division. Each chapter must have a narrative sense, not be random. 3. Excessively slow introductions. The reader must be involved from the beginning. 4. Too many forced cliffhangers. Cliffhangers work, but using them in every chapter can be artificial. A good division into chapters helps keep the reader immersed in the story. Practical exercise. Divide your story into at least 10 chapters and assign each a title and a key event. Check if the chapters are balanced in length and pace. Read the closing points of each chapter aloud. Do they leave you wanting to continue? Testing the structure helps improve the fluidity of reading. Lesson summary. Today we learned the importance of division into chapters to make reading smoother. Strategies for organizing chapters effectively. Techniques for maintaining the narrative pace and keeping the reader's attention high. Practical tools for testing the structure of the chapters. Thanks for following this lesson. See you next time.